Right, hello, this is just a Blender Hangout, just working on a project, an old project number, whatever number it is, there's too many projects. So as I'm working on it, might as well just stream. So that is what we shall be doing. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So. Where's my... Oh, there it is. Grab that. That's called ground. So making these collision boxes for these tileable game objects, game tiles. Come on. And they're kind of tricky because a simple one would be to just do it as a big concave block like this, but it basically then means that for gameplay purposes you can't get inside the bay window because that's all blocked off, which kind of breaks the immersion aspect of the assets. So but blocking off the bay window means that you can make or utilize really simple collision objects. But the problem with that, of course, is then that you're blocking off the bay window. So it's a compromise. What we'll do with that is just duplicate. So I can get rid of that. Delete. Join. And the thing is as well is that this is the interesting thing about brush volumes when it comes to collision. That's why they are so effective as collision objects, because you can literally just drop in a block over something or cut a section out and still get valid collision spaces. Doing it with meshes is tricky in so much as you can't guarantee the behavior of the engine or the technology that the assets will be used in. So if as an asset creator, so if you're making an asset pack, yeah, you can make it for Unity, you can make it for Godot, you can make it for Unreal. But from the point of view of asset production, that basically means that you have potentially three, four, however multiple versions of the same asset pack. And of course, to be efficient, you want to try and use the same assets for multiple engines. And you can do that, obviously, but the problem there is that the different engines have different requirements and or idiosyncrasies that you kind of have to accommodate, but not always. So it's tricky. And collision is one of those. Collision hulls. So that's that. Alright, so that can now be parented to that. Right, so is that all of these done? Right, so this one there. Whoops. Loop and parents. Transform. Collision. There we go. So why isn't that? Dang it. There we go. Okay, that's not done as well. So click. And one of the other things as well for collision. So there's not going to be a whole lot of talking in this stream. So if you've got some music playing, it's best to play that, because still haven't found a third-party service that will allow streaming audio, music audio, onto all channels without causing problems later if they rescind the license on one platform, and which has had that happen before. So with collision, so we're talking about blocky shapes, simple shapes, but of course we don't necessarily always need to have collision be precise. As long as you are making your collision in a very sort of generalistic sense, you can have minor bits of clipping, because we can assume, or we can presume, that the player character, or the camera that's associated with the player character isn't necessarily going to be able to get close enough to these surfaces to be able to clip through them. But that is something that kind of need to be aware of, and if that becomes an issue, or if that is to be an issue with something like this, we can just put a loop cut down the center and split this off, because these have to be concave shapes. So we might be able to just get away with doing something like that, because this, no, not concave, convex. Yeah, concave goes in. Yeah, convex shape. So long as the shape, resulting shape, is convex, that's a valid form for collision. But even that, as we were saying earlier, that catering for the different, let's just check something. Even if we are Ew, doesn't it work on transparent surfaces? Could have sworn it did. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that didn't work on. That's something new every day. That's kind of weird, because you would have thought that the surface is a surface. If we've got face orientation enabled, that we are just basically checking literally the orientation of the face, so the transparency shouldn't be an issue for it, but apparently it is. Double check. Yeah, so you have to be careful that catering to the, even though this is a convex collision form, the fact that this is one mesh may cause issues. So under certain circumstances you may need to, yeah, number 3, face select, you may need to completely detach this to a separate object and fill. So let's just move that to one side. Fill these surfaces so that you end up with 2 objects that are butted together face to face. But again, it depends how you are, the engine you're using, how it handles collision. So you could go with, let's do it with this one. Down the middle. So both of these are valid. Oops. Oh, did I do them as part of the same object? Oh, I must have done. Let's turn that off. It's bright. Yeah, I did them as part of the same object. So this is valid as a single object, and this is valid as 2 separate objects. But of course, you've got to be careful about complicating or overcomplicating collision. So let's get rid of that. X, dissolve edges. That flattens that back out. Let's join these 2 back together. Merge distance. Select that loop. Get rid. Oop. Oh, there's a face in there. Come out wherever you are. Delete. And hide. Edge. Right, so parent, where is that? Okay. Now, of course, the other thing about collision, you want to make sure that your origin point for both the object, so that's the curtain in this case, and the collision box are the same. That's okay. That's okay. Oops. And there is also a question as to whether it's worth making your collisions super accurate, relatively speaking, in terms of, so we're dealing with, obviously with collision, we're dealing with broad volumes, so essentially bounding boxes. So if we think of our collision instead of a shape, instead we think of it as a bound, oops, that's the wrong one, a bounding box. You know, there's then questions as to how accurate we want to make the shape of the collision. So in this case, what have we got here? What's that stuff in the middle? Oh, that's the bounding box wireframe. Duh. Whether we want to make these terribly accurate in terms of approximating the height of the collision, because again, with these being game assets and they will inform gameplay, how accurate do we want the collision to be? If we're depending on the gameplay, we might just be dealing with general volumes, in which case making these the height of the curtains might be part of the gameplay. You know, being able to, let's say for example, if physics is enabled, throwing something on top of the curtains, like a ball of wool for a cat or something. So the question then is, well, do you want them to be accurate in approximate senses, or whether we want them to be very general? In this case, because we are kind of snapped to the grid anyway, we might as well make them generally accurate. And it would be the same at the bottom as well. Do you want the bottom of these to be at the bottom of the collision to match the bottom of the curtains? Because for gameplay purposes, whilst this might be accurate for physics, the problem with that is that things can get trapped under there. So if you have a game mechanism that allows people to kick or move things around, having these being accurate, having your collision, relatively speaking, accurately reflect the size and shape in the general sense, so again we're dealing with bounding boxes, having it match the shape of the object that they are acting as collision for can potentially cause problems, because things can get stuck under here. And if they get stuck, you can crash your game. Because, you know, physics isn't necessarily static in terms of objects that you can kick around. And there are plenty of instances where, for example, a ball might get stuck under there, and the constant play of the engine trying to fit the ball under that gap might just crash the game. So you have to decide whether it's worth making your physics accurate. It's easy to do from the top, but it's more difficult to do it from the bottom. I mean, even with the top, depending on the game, if you've got a roof or ceiling, you've got the same problem where objects can get stuck at the top. So this is the question that needs to be answered when you are creating your collisions, whether you want them to be. So we've got our wall units. They are, let's edit that, exit that. Wall units, that's the collision. So our wall units are 2 units high. So essentially 1 by 1, or 1 width by 2 height, or 2 height and 2 width. There are no ceiling units for these assets, but if you did have a ceiling or roof unit, the same concerns with collision under objects also apply above objects. So if there were a ceiling set for this, or roof set, by dropping the collision to reflect the height of the curtain, we've moved or duplicated the problem that we might have down here, also up here at the top of the curtain. So you have to contend with that from the point of view of the collision that you provide with your assets. I mean, it's notwithstanding that if you use simple shapes, it means that the collision holes can be adjusted and or removed and replaced by the game's own collision volumes or collision instances. But that's something to keep in mind, that depending on your gameplay, how accurate you want your collision to be relative to the objects they represent. So just going through all of that reminded me why these collision holes were the size and shape that they were. Because the walls are 2 units high. So there. Anti-cooking monster, it's just a general set of assets that hopefully will be published soon, and it's just a set that can be used to create something. No, was it in Unity? I think it was Unity. Hang on. Unity Hub. Just save that. Come on, Unity Hub. Dang it. Do not like signing into things when we're live streaming. That's such an annoyance. Right, I'm going to have to forego that. But basically, I've got a test project. I'll have to remember to, if we continue with this in another stream, I'll have to remember to sign into Unity Hub. But basically, it was a scene in Unity using these assets. Just as a way of example in terms of what they can be used for, but it's just basically an asset pack. Oh, hey, Gaff. Right, asset management. Right, there we go. Hey! Thumbs up, Blendy edits. Yeah, exactly. We need more just Blender Hangouts. Just people just making stuff and just hanging out. I would have some music playing, but last time I did that I got copyright struck. So you'll have to listen to your own music. Hey, you're welcome, Gaff. I do my best. This is just a generic asset pack, by the way. It's not for anything specific. Cough, IMVU. Dang it. Blender doesn't, it really doesn't like you trying to click through objects. So that's the left one. Where's the other one gone? Oh, that's one window. Oh, okay. Yeah, so this pack was originally started if you can believe this, 2015. So the first 2015, that's nearly 10 years ago. It's taken that long in between all the other projects and things to get somewhere to the point where this is getting close to being releasable as an asset pack. 10 years. Okay, so that's the curtains. Yes, Blender really doesn't like you clicking through objects. Now of course, so it's that one. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But everything is as an asset pack. So it's tiling assets. So everything's snapped to the grid. So we've got a grid setup of basically big squares. So everything just, when snapping, it just snaps to the grid. Right, so that's the curtains. Got all the trim done. Oh, right, okay. Oh, I have. Oh, and the other thing that you have to be mindful of as well is you have to make sure that your meshes and your collision, again, depending on your game engine, some of them are tolerant of this, others just aren't. You have to make sure that all your meshes are closed. So that basically means solid shapes. There are no holes or gaps in them. Which, oh, why is that? Oh, that's why. Yeah, so you have to make sure your meshes are like that and your collision. So everything has to be a solid object. And then, of course, you have to decide so we've got flat walls, but to make them interesting, we've got some, I don't know what these are actually called. This bit, this framing is a chair rail. But when you combine it with a panel, and then obviously you've got your skirting board, this unit is called something, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. And then we've got other units for the top of the wall, which is a picture rail. So that would be your traditional picture rail from which pictures, as in paintings, would hang from. That's why it's called a picture rail. But when you are creating your asset packs, you have to decide whether it's worth. It's like so we've got this many walls already, and that's literally to accommodate the different orientations that the walls can have relative to their pivot points, because the walls have to have thickness. And if the walls have thickness, that means that when you rotate the wall around a corner, or when you rotate it your 90, 180 degrees, the thickness affects, well, it repositions itself. So if you then want to put another wall butted up to the wall you've just placed, this thickness is offset, obviously, from the pivot point. So that now means you have to make another wall asset to accommodate the orientation that you want that wall to be in relative to the wall that you placed. And then when you do that, you might need to do another wall to accommodate the orientation of this wall relative to this wall. So it gets really, really quite complicated. So you then have to think that if you want things on the walls in terms of decorations, so as we were talking here, we've got the chair rail and this paneling, skirting board and a picture rail. If you put those, or if you include those as part of that single wall unit, that now means you have to have, I mean, depending on what you're doing, obviously, you have to have another version of this with the picture rail, the chair rail, the paneling and the skirting board, or that wall with just a picture rail and or the chair rail, skirting board, etc. So that's now 3 versions of that same wall. Whoops. 3 versions of that same wall asset instead of just one version of the wall asset and a set of add-ons that are completely separate that you can add to that wall section. So you can imagine that if you then do the different versions of all the wall parts that you have or you need to accommodate, that bloats up the asset pack quite significantly, because you've essentially got, well, in this particular example, 3 different versions of each wall unit depending on the orientation and the combo that you're able to place in the editor. So which is more efficient, having one wall and the add-ons, or 3 walls with all the add-ons and the combos of the add-ons included in the walls? And that's further complicated by the fact that some engines, like Roblox, for example, only, if I don't quote me on this, only allows 1 material per mesh. So you can't have combination meshes with combinations like this. So you have to, under certain circumstances, you have to separate all your mesh objects into separate components, each of which has its own material assignment, 1 material assignment. So these asset packs can be a nightmare to put together relative to them being general asset packs that can be used in various engines. You know, like Unity, Unreal, Godot, Roblox. What else is there? There's quite a few. So that's the walls, that's the skirting, that's okay. Where are the... So that's the... Okay, so... I might have to come back to these. Blender edits. It depends what you want to do. I mean, if it's just... Yeah, it depends what you're going to do. If you're going to be bringing in some animation as well, you're best off using FBX, because that'll include everything: your mesh, your materials, your animation. It'll include shape keys or morphs, and other information that you may include in the file in terms of custom properties. It'll include all of those. Whereas if you are, but you are dependent on the ability of the program that you're using to import, export. It's the compatibility. So if you are bringing something in from another program into Blender, you may find that you can actually have data loss because of the difference between the source application and Blender. But FBX is generally going to be a safe bet. Otherwise, you can just use Object, which will be your mesh of materials. And if you are really pushed, and it's an old program, let's say you're trying to bring something in from Gmax, you might be able to get away with something like is it 3DS? I think it is, but that again is just mesh data. But if you were really stuck, that's what you'd have access to that, I should think, because most applications, old apps, support 3DS. But yeah, FBX as a general rule of thumb. Yeah, I think I'll have to come back to those. So there again, in terms of the collision, what we were talking about earlier. So the simplest form of collision for something like this is just to do a block. But of course that means that you can't then, depending on your gameplay, you can't then get under the table. Or you can't, again, say, let's say you're kicking something around the room, you can't get under the table. So we can make our collision accurate in a general sense, but we don't want to make it too accurate where we're making the collision too complex. So for something like this, let's just invert selection, Control I, hide all of those. So for this, for example, let's just move this to one side. Make this a more complex shape, but still keeping it yeah, so select, let's do this in object mode, duplicate, just do the one leg, like so. That's the top face. I want to try and avoid intersecting collision components or parts of the collision. That's one leg. Two. Duplicate. And then select all of those and the top, join them together, Control J, and that is our more complex collision hull. But it's still made using valid convex volumes. And this then obviously then means that things can be kicked under the table, obviously depending on the gameplay mechanic, which the original doesn't accommodate. So what's that one? That's the original. Table dynamic. Okay, so we can get rid of that. Delete. Don't need it anymore. Parent. And of course, just doing that, we have to keep in mind as well. Whoops. So again, depending on the game engine you're making the assets for, the relationship between the collision hull and your actual object will vary depending on the requirements of the engine, because for convenience sake the assets are just set up so that the collision is parented as a separate object to the game object, but that's not always workable. So some engines might be able to just combine the two together into one object with material assignments. So let's just do that, and we'll be able to undo this. Let's join them together. And it will be your material assignments that define the separation, the delineation between the collision hull and the main game object. But for convenience in terms of making your asset pack, you just want to keep them separate and just parent them together so that they are easy to work with as a unit. So we can select the game object itself. So it's just red at the moment, just for whilst the assets are being worked on and prepped. Once everything's prepped, they'll just be where is it? Wireframed or bounding box, just to make it easy to manipulate the objects. But this is just so that, right, so that one's been done, so it's now in textured mode. So the others, that's that one. So what's that one? Vanity box. Yeah, so I have to do the same thing with the table. So select invert selection, hide. Right, so mesh, whoops, no, add cube. Where's that gone? There it is. Where is it? Oh, what? It's all the way over there. Control tab, or Control plus. Okay. Whoops, Control plus. And as nutty as it might sound, you want to try and align your collision structures to the grid. Right, so that's okay. So duplicate that. Shift D. Shift D. But so right, so what is that? 1, 2, 3. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops. So, same sort of issue that we were talking about earlier about accuracy. I mean, we could do that so we get closer to the top, but then we've got this area that we might need to do something with, or we can just leave it like that, because with that being under the table, this area, because this is under the table, the user can't, again it depends on the gameplay and how whatever these assets are being used for, the player might not ordinarily be able to access that or see it. So do you necessarily need to make sure that you're, because otherwise we would have to drop in another, well, let's do it actually, but that then starts to complicate the collision, but let's do it anyway. Right, so I need to snap cursor to that should be fine. Where is the cursor? Right, so cursor to selected. Edit mode. So that's that. Add cube as our cube. And because our origin point is snapped to the grid, and we've got the cursor snapped to the origin point, when we add our objects, it'll obviously be snapped to the cursor or the origin depending on what we're doing, but because it is snapped to the grid, the regular size of the cube or the object we're adding will also be snapped to the grid just by the nature of it being a uniform shape. You screamed at, what did you scream at a pigeon for? Blender edits. Control plus. Well, I'm pretty sure the pigeon probably didn't appreciate being screamed at just because you were bored. Scale. I mean, it might have been just minding its own business, and all of a sudden this crazy person is screaming at it. Might have to go to therapy now. Oh, that's why that's out of whack. Okay, so let's just do this. Let's move that up there. Again, do we need to bother about the accuracy or not? Plus, control plus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we now have to, let's just hide that for the moment. Shift click. Unhide, Alt H. So that's our adjusted. It's still very generic in terms of its shape. So it's accurate to a degree, but not overly accurate. But we're making sure that we're using convex. I never get those two right. Convex. Convex shapes. That's convex. That's concave. Oh, it's you need to apologize to the pigeon, not to it's got bills to pay and everything, I would imagine. Minding its own business. Yeah, so that's the table collision, and the same thing again. So we've now accommodated things being kicked under or whatever table, but we don't necessarily need to worry too much about how accurate the collision is from a general sense. Well, I'm not surprised the pigeon flew away when it's being shouted at like that. Nobody likes to be shouted at. Pigeons in particular. Mind you, the ones in Trafalgar Square have a rather high tolerance of being screamed at, so you might not have got one of the Trafalgar Square pigeons. Probably one of its cousins. It's the very sensitive cousins. Right, so these are the unhide. Hide all inside. So you do the same thing for the chair as well. Again, this is where it starts to get complicated. Well, it's probably not something that we want to get into. Intrusive thoughts, Blender edits. So yeah, it's once you start working on your collision, you've then got to decide how accurate you want to start making it. I mean, we've got all of these blocks, that's all they need. So there are lots of lots of decisions that have to be made when it comes to building asset packs. Oh, grab that, parent. So those two are done. So that's the table and its collision. That's that table and its collision. So it's going to be a big asset pack. I think there's something like almost 100 parts in this. Let's just save that. Yeah, so for next stream, we'll call it quits there because we've been going for about, how long have we been going for? About an hour. Call it quits there, and I shall endeavour to let me make a note of this actually. Log into Unity. Show example room. Yes, so that was an actual pen and an actual notepad with actual writing, making an actual note. So there's your paper noise. Right, so we'll call it quits there. And oh, did I save that? Save. Yeah. And I will endeavour to stream when working on these, because the problem with streaming is that the problem with Blender streaming in particular, well, no, let's flip this. It's easy to stream a game. You know, that's why there are so many game streamers, because, you know, you are essentially watching entertainment when you're watching somebody streaming a game. But when it comes to things like this, when it's art, air quotes, it gets tricky because, you know, it's much more what are you doing? What are you streaming? Why are you streaming? When you're working on something like we've been working on, it's difficult to just stream and just say nothing, you know, and have music on in the background like many people do. But that to me seems to be a bit redundant, because you're not necessarily learning anything from the point of view of watching whatever it is that, I mean, obviously if you've got minutes to pass and you're just watching something just to pass the time, then that's fine. But I find it tricky to just stream for the sake of streaming. If I'm streaming something, there's got to be some sort of informational, educational, instructive element to it. Otherwise, I find them just I don't know. Redundant isn't the right word, but I think you get what I mean. But anyway, I shall endeavour to stream more frequently this type of stuff that gives you real world information in terms of how you do things or tackle things as they relate to real projects, because this will eventually, once they get it done, this will be available as an asset pack for download. So this isn't just an exercise in making something. This is what needs to be done in order to make this an effective asset pack to be made available for people to use for constructing their own games. I mean, it's similar to, there's another, let's just save this. Open. So this asset pack. Oh, I haven't got this set up with to use, or have I? Oh yes, I have. Okay. So this asset pack is partially available in Unity Store, but these are new components to that asset pack that's available. So still working on this update, but these are real products. They're not just exercises in making something. So anything that is done from the point of view of streaming this sort of stuff is in IRL, in real world, or in real life. So it will have some informational or educational value rather than it just being, you know, streamed for the sake of streaming and, you know, look how clever I am, or look how elite I am as a gamer. But anyway, that's beside the point. Right, we'll call it quits there, and we shall see you on the next stream. So thanks for lurking, lurkers, and thanks for popping in comments. Anti-Cookie Monster, Gaff, and Blendy Edits, of course, with his pigeon. Yes, traumatized pigeons. Anyway, see you on the next one. Bye for now.